watching Captains on CNBC Africa. I'm chatting to Brian Joffe, the CEO of Bidvest. Brian, let's go back to when you were 32 years old. And
long time ago.
You had made your first million. It was your first instance in deal making where you took a bite size of the company, and over a very, very quick period, you landed up becoming the owner of that entity. And I think that has probably the mark of your career. You've done it in bigger and bigger guises as the years have progressed.
It was always in my blood, I guess, to do deals. I think it's developed over time. It's, the food or the pet food business when I started was quite a competitive business, and I think South Africa was South Africa historically was really a monopoly type economy. So you had these very big corporates, Old Mutual, SAB, I think it was General Mining, and all those big guys. And because of the hothouse effect of sanctions at the time, they had nowhere to put their money, so they just kept on diversifying into more and more activities. So, when I went into the pet food business, my competitors were Tiger Oats, as it was then named, Premier Milling, Reckitt and Coleman, names that were huge. And so to have got to where I got in itself, even though I made no money, got market share, but with no money, I learned something about value, because I didn't really think there was real value in just having sales. I always thought that the real value was in the cash, how much money you could spend. It wasn't how much you could report. And so, I learned a little bit about, from that onwards, what real value really was. And I think that the opportunity that sanctions gave me, the circumstance of South Africa's history, I think gave me opportunities which maybe I wouldn't have had in today's world.
Looking into your background, I didn't know that you spent a short time in the US. What was that about? Because it was in your early years.
Well, after I sold the pet food business, I was going to emigrate from South Africa. And so I did. I packed up and I went with my family, and I went there with very little planned and took up playing golf. So I played golf every single day other than Sundays and Tuesdays. Sundays because if I would have played, I would have got divorced, and Tuesdays because the club was closed. Other than that, I would have played every day.
Was this part of an early retirement plan?
Yeah, I'd actually retired. I can't remember, 30 odd, and I was retired. I used to play. People didn't understand where this young South African arrived over there with very little money. It was, in those days, may have been about $1 million. I remember the rand was $1 in those days, and I emigrated, and that's what I did. But it didn't last long. I have to work, and my mind it was always concentrating on where I could make some money. And the United States wasn't really for me. It was too complicated.
How long did you spend in the States?
About 2 years.
What made you come back?
Well, I came back here on vacation, and I met the buyer from what was then called the OK Bazaars. And he said to me, why don't you get back into the pet food business, because it's not really competitive. And so I went along to what was then WNA, Manny Simkovitz, and I said, Manny, I want to get back into this business. Let's try and buy Lopus. I think that was the company. It was, I don't know if it's still around today. And he said, okay. And then we landed up not doing a deal in the end, over 500,000 Rand, which I suppose in those years was a lot of money. And then he said to me, okay, well, why don't you come and work for me? So I landed up, working for WNA from about 1983 until 1988, and then in 1988 got involved in the Bidvest venture.
Let's talk about Bidvest's growth, and at the moment you have extensive geographic diversification. Europe is a big territory for you with your food services business, and obviously the news headlines last year focused on the potential listing of the food services business. Give me a little more clarity.
Our international food services business is growing at a quicker rate than the businesses in South Africa, and it's become a bigger component piece. So, which gave us two opportunities. So the one was that we could have spun it off, and maybe we could have got a lot of money for it. The other is that, of course, it's a big component piece of what we're doing, and we shouldn't get rid of it because it's still continuing to grow. we finally took a decision that it was an integral part of Bidvest, and it was important for us and for it, the overseas business, to have South Africa as a parent, because we've been feeding it its growth capital over the last, whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 years. So we pretty much have decided this is us, and we are going to continue to grow with the business. So whereas it was at one point in time 20, 25%, today it's probably 30, 35, sorry, even more, closer to 40% of South Africa's earnings, of Bidvest earnings. So, yeah.
And the LSE listing?
No, I think that what we wanting to do at this point in time is to stay as we are, and we're going to continue to manage the business as wholly owned subsidiary. It's well diversified over the whole world now. We're more than 30 countries. We're the largest food service player outside of the United States. And we believe that we've got some real strategic advantage and momentum going.
You've also been quoted recently as talking about interest in the US and potentially a foray into that territory.
Well, the United States, is obviously a big market, and there are very big players there. Very competitive, very costly to enter. We've had lots of opportunities to look, but we haven't had a lot of opportunity to buy. And so it's one of those things that we can't force the pace on. Hopefully one day an opportunity will arise which will match for us at a reasonable price, and we will get into that market. I think it
You are interested then in the US if the right opportunity presents itself?
Yeah, I think that it just seems that if you take the combination of the United States together with our geographic spread, a combination of those two pieces is advantageous to whoever. So we're continuing to develop outside the United States, and there are obviously people who continue to develop in the US. How we get those two pieces together, hopefully time will give us the answer.
More recent news flow, Adcock Ingram and the very public furore over Adcock, which you obviously came out on the winning side of. Or is it the winning side? Exactly. I see your reaction there. Is it the winning side? Do you regret going after Adcock Ingram?
I think that Adcock Ingram, let me start from the beginning and say at the outset that Adcock has got potential as a company. There's a lot of hard work that's going to have to go into making it a successful company and to get it back to where it was in its former years. So from that point of view, I'm not disappointed. I think that there is some degree of disappointment in what we found.
Well, you wrote off R1 billion.
Well, that's, I think what we found versus what we thought we'd find, I think there was some disappointment, and I suppose we ourselves have got some criticism of ourselves to take because, we did this thing with very little outside information other than what the company published, and then the question was whether what was there, what they said was there, was there. But that's history and whatever. I think the other thing that I think we underestimated was South Africa takeover rules really weren't geared up for this type of event. And wherever we went, we were really testing new law all the time. We had a new Companies Act, the TRP was testing new ground, and it obviously didn't really work all that well. But listen, at the end of the day, you've got to have mistakes, and this may not be, time will tell. And
well, a recent positive trading update, so a turnaround is obviously in full swing.
I think that there's no doubt that the company is at least focusing now on the problems. I think one of the things that it didn't do before, I don't know if it really realized where its issues are. I think clearly today management understands where the issues are, and that obviously will enable them to address it. So there are a few things that are going to be done, and they are quite big things, and over time hopefully we'll get it right.
Are you spending some time personally in that Adcock boardroom?
Yeah, I spend some time on it. Some of the methodology by which we're attacking the issues, obviously we put in place. But the execution, day-to-day execution, we obviously are not involved in, and we don't really technically control the company right now. We own, and the big question mark whether we own 30% or 34.5%, depends on how you want to look at it. We obviously would like to over time get more, I think. But it's one of those things that's got to be played by ear.
I don't think it's going too far to say that you are probably the best known entrepreneur in South Africa and also credited as being the most successful entrepreneur in South Africa. Often people focus in these interviews on the successes. What are the failures that have shaped you and that have shaped Bidvest?
I think success can't be measured in success rates, because the basket has obviously got some good ones and it's got some bad ones, because no entrepreneur, if you're wanting to have good ones, can't have bad ones. I think it's just a mix, and the only real issue is whether you can have more good ones than bad ones.
Is there anything that stands out for you, just one instance that really rocked the boat or really rocked you at the end of the day?
Insofar as bad decisions are concerned, well, not really, because the big, I suppose, fortunate thing is that we haven't had any bad ones that potentially have been, destroying. I mean, in write-down terms, obviously Adcock is the biggest, but we're writing down to stock market values. It's not necessarily its intrinsic value. I have no doubt that the intrinsic value of Adcock as a company is worth more than our carry cost. That I have no doubt for sure, because it has a significant market share and has significant products. And the pharmaceutical business is a very protected business. So it's not like anybody can come tomorrow and just do whatever you like in it. So we have got a position there. The real question is whether we can obviously build on that. Look, I think I look back and I think, listen, why did I do that? It was silly. I mean, we have that. I mean, we sold some assets which we should never have sold. And in fact...
Like Nampak.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that had we eventually succeeded in following up on our Adcock, on our Nampak piece, I have no doubt that we would have done better with it, I think. Because I think, as I've alluded to before, I think the ability of Bidvest to create entrepreneurs in a free way, if you want to call it, is more so than other corporations do. In the early days, we weren't bogged down with governance, and so we were much more entrepreneurial. Of course, today the company's got bigger and there are more rules here, and the corporate world has changed a little bit. But I still think that Bidvest knows how to promote entrepreneurs. I hope.
I'm chatting to Brian Joffe, the CEO of Bidvest, and you're watching Captains on CNBC Africa. Chatting to Brian Joffe, the CEO of Bidvest, and you're watching Captains here on CNBC Africa DSTV 410. Let's talk about your leadership style. Do you delegate?
I do, but I don't believe in just delegating without following up. I mean, I'm a very detailed person, so whilst I'm very sort of free-thinking and very free-flowing, if you want to call it in ideas terms, I do like to be sure that the detail is being followed up, because I think without the detail, I think you get into a messy position. So I hope that as Bidvest has got bigger and it's getting bigger, the one thing that getting bigger does is you lose the detail. And that unfortunately is a weakness of all big corporates, and I just hope that we're doing that reasonably well.
Is that detail a legacy of being a chartered accountant?
Definitely not. I think that whilst I'm a chartered accountant, I'm not too sure that I agree with a lot of the accounting policies, which doesn't make me very much of a favorite of the auditors. I just don't agree, and I just don't understand how commercially the accounting concepts give to readers and to investors a true understanding of what companies actually do and how they do perform. So yeah, I'm an accountant, but I'm definitely not a conservative one. The detail really for me is not really the accounting detail, it's not the numbers detail. It's the detail to attention to the activity that's being done and knowing what are the important things to measure and to monitor. Because some things really don't matter at the end of the day. So, you know, for example, I mean, a lot of people concentrate on what the profits are in a business. For me, it's a lot more about what are the returns in the business, what are the people managing, what are they actually getting out of the investment. So, and the capital allocation pieces are quite important as well. So, when I talk about detail, it's not so much about whether the numbers are 100% right or wrong.
How do you go about identifying a target for takeover or partial takeover?
Well, I think the key, I guess, of a successful takeover is seeing what the seller doesn't see. Because if the seller saw the same things that we potentially saw, they obviously wouldn't sell it to us at the price of selling it to us. Now, that doesn't mean that we are, clairvoyants and we can see all the future clearly. I mean, a lot of the time we are making assessments about things which sometimes don't turn out quite the way they are. I mean, I suppose you could take Adcock as a point in case, but for us, the ability is to see a company which has weaknesses and to see their tomorrow in a better light than they themselves see it. So it's very unusual, it would be very rare that Bidvest would buy a prime, good performing company, because there's nothing really more that we could add. So if we saw this thing was at its maximum, it's only downhill from there. So we'd like to buy underperforming company. And that was the attraction with Adcock, because we are convinced, even until today, that that company was underperforming and still remains as today underperforming. And we just need to be sure that we can deliver its performance.
What fascinates me about you is the balance between the detail and the numbers focus and then the artistic side that you have brought into the South African space, obviously through your photography, your beautiful book, My Book, which you published, and wildlife photos have been your forte. Now you are moving into glycé art. Is that the correct terminology?
That's the correct terminology. Well, I didn't really move into it. What happened was I was on vacation in August, and I was walking through these streets in Italy somewhere, and I saw some of this art in these windows, and I said to my wife, I bet I can do that. I've never done art in my life before. In fact, the only thing I could draw is the back of an elephant and a shoe. And I said to her, I bet I can do that. And so when I came back, I took a stylus and I drew on the computer, colored it in on the computer, and I got glycé art. And all of a sudden people said, listen, this is brilliant. Look, I don't think it's so brilliant. It's a bit naive, a bit simple, I think, but very exciting and very funny.
I'm not going to let you brush this under the carpet that easily, because you actually have moved from experimentation to your first exhibition, and that is happening on the 4th of March. That's got to be a big move.
Well, what happened was that a guy in our office by the name of Kevin, who's my promoter, if you can call it that, showed one or two of my works to a gallery. And they thought it was quite good. So what they said, would I be prepared for charity to exhibit some of these works? So being for charity, I'm pretty much like giving money to charity. I said, okay, I have no problem. So I developed a portfolio of about 18 pieces, and they're going to sell these things for charity on the 4th of March. The only thing that I hope is that not too many people laugh at my art and think that it's really simple and stupid. I mean, it's...
Nobody's going to laugh at your art.
I mean,
in the same way that they didn't laugh at your photography. You've got beautiful photography.
Look, I think that my skills in photography are a lot better than my skills in art. But they are fun pieces, they're very colorful pieces, and listen, it's not Picasso.
Now that we're getting to know the real Brian Joffe, I want to ask you about your most beautiful place in the world. Where is that?
Well, that's a difficult thing to answer in the way you've put the question. My best place, and I want to keep it a secret, so I'll tell you, so everybody in your show can know, is Punta del Este in Uruguay.
You know what's going to happen now? Everyone's going to start Googling.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a very, very backward kind of place. It's like a mixture between Muizenberg and Plettenberg Bay 50 years ago. So you go there, nobody speaks English, very little sophistication, but very beautiful for me.
Brian, talk to me about your success and what that means for you now when you look back on it.
Look, I'm very chuffed, I guess, at what's been achieved. And it's not only the money, And listen, I didn't maximize the amount of money I could have made out of Bidvest, that's for sure. So if I look and valued myself as an entrepreneur in terms of money that's been created for myself, I've done okay, but I haven't done as well as I could have done. But I think that there's one thing that I can say that very few other people have done. I've developed and promoted and created more entrepreneurs, more skill set in the South African market than probably anybody else. And it's not because I've trained them, it's because I've given them the opportunity. And that, to me, was a big thing.
South Africa is obviously your home. I've spoken extensively to a number of captains of industry of late about what state they feel South Africa is in.
Maybe I can just give it by way of example. Many people today are concentrating a lot on Eskom and power. I just hope, we are where we are with it, and I don't think we can take that away. The thing that I think that we need to learn is the lesson of what happened with Eskom, and we don't translate that into the rest of the infrastructure of South Africa. So whilst everybody's concentrating a lot on the issues revolving around Eskom and Eskom issues, the infrastructure of South Africa needs to be attended to, because it as a whole is deteriorating too. And if you don't maintain an infrastructure of a country, the costs of eventually putting it right are so big that you can't get it done. And that's the challenge that's happened with Eskom. So I just hope that the lesson of Eskom will translate into a lesson for South Africa.
Do you think we are embracing that lesson?
I hope so. I mean, I'm not close enough to know, but I don't despair. I think that the politics of South Africa must be differentiated by the management and fulfillment of the policy in South Africa. So I don't think the fulfillment of the policies of South Africa have necessarily been done as well as they could have been done. I don't think the policies themselves are all that bad. So we've got lots of good aspirations, but sometimes the delivery is a bit subpar.
Let me turn that question around. Do you think that your businesses within South Africa are at risk considering the deterioration of infrastructure?
Look, the deterioration of infrastructure may offer opportunities as a business, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the country. So we as a business have to work within the framework of what is allowed or available to work within. And that's an opportunistic thing. On the other side of that, the government needs to provide to make sure that the country is as up to date as it can possibly be. I mean, we have to, at the end of the day, create more jobs. We have to have more education. We have to have a few more of these things. We have to have good roads. We have to have traffic lights at work. We have to have electricity. All of those things are important. But you can't, and you've got to have to prioritize and make sure that the country does work. I don't think what we can do is now fix Eskom and let everything else go to pot, because that's not going to solve anything. We'll fix Eskom and then what? Do we have no roads?
Well, I don't want to end on a negative, although
No,
it is a positive. It is a positive. You are turning it around. You're saying take the lesson and learn it.
I say again, it's not a negative. The issue here is that there's an opportunity here for a lesson. And we can't blame anybody. I mean, I have my own views as to why Eskom landed up where it is, and it had nothing to do with the government policy. It had something more to do with where the emphasis in the management of Eskom was put. So they managed the company for performance, financial performance, rather than to manage the company for delivery performance. And we need to be sure that in South Africa overall, that the infrastructure pieces of South Africa, Transnet, the post office, every piece that is managed for infrastructure is managed for delivery of infrastructure, not managed for profit, because that's what they're there for.
Do you know how many people are watching this interview right now and saying, I want to be the next Brian Joffe? What is your advice to them?
And I see myself a lot different to what you're portraying me as. I mean, I'm a regular guy called Brian. I interact with many people because of my football connection of our team in the streets. People ask me the same question: How do I get to be you? And my suggestion to everybody: don't even try, because it's not something you can copy. I'm me, and you are you. And you can get there maybe in a lot easier and better ways than I've got to where I've got. So, but I think there are just one or two fundamental issues. The one is you can't get there without hard work, and it's not hard. It's not hard work about necessarily numbers of hours that you spend, because if you spend numbers of bad hours, you're not going to get a good result. So if you spend your good hours smartly managing yourself, I think is number one. And number two, you have to know what are the goals that you want to achieve. I don't think it's just you can go down a road with no direction. I mean, you know what would happen if you did that with a car. You would just land up with nowhere. So I think that returns, investment and returns are critical to an outcome. So it's about money. You know, there are obviously other people who have different aspirations. I mean, if you're a good artist, it's about producing a good piece of art. But as a businessman, it's about the money at the end of the day. It's not about the sentiment. You've got to get there honestly, and with hard work, and I think take the opportunities. And they're there all the time. And they're more difficult today, no doubt. It's a much more difficult environment to where I was. But they are still there. Every single day, you mentioned the deterioration of infrastructure. Therein lies a huge opportunity for somebody.
Well, I've just been chatting to a regular guy called Brian, who also happens to be the CEO of Bidvest and one of South Africa's biggest and brightest entrepreneurs. You're watching Captains on CNBC Africa.